We've now got our two model instance methods for updating a record down pat. So we covered update and we covered the set and save methodology. We're now going to move on to our class-based updates. In practice, all three of these updates are going to work very similar to how the remove helpers worked as well. So we can call update, that will update all of the records, just like remove would remove all the records that match some criteria. Same thing with find one and update, and same thing with find by ID and update as well. I had mentioned in the last section that as we're getting into these model update or these class-based update functions, that things were going to start to get a little bit more challenging. We're first going to walk through the simple way of using these three helpers right here, and then we will talk about how they can be kind of enhanced and used in a much more advanced fashion as well. Okay, so first we'll cover the easy functionality, and then we'll update it to be the much more interesting and complex stuff. So let's get started with walking through update, find one update, and find by ID and update. Now we just saw all three of these kind of like in the remove context just a moment ago. So we're going to get through all three pretty quickly and just kind of knock them all out in one go. We'll start off by putting in our it statements. So we'll say about a model class can update. We'll put in our done callback and our function. And then we'll just do all three of the it statements in one go. So a model class can update one record. So this will be find one and update. And then finally, a model class can find an ID, or excuse me, a record with a ID and update. Okay, and then I'll zoom out just a little bit so you can see that entire line. So just a very long string description and then done and close off the function. I'm going to zoom back in just to make sure everything's nice and legible. Okay, so let's get through this one at a time. So for the model class can update, the function signature is very similar to the delete that we were working on just a moment ago. So I'm going to flip over to my delete test file. Inside of our delete test file, we called user.remove, and then we passed in a kind of selector of sorts. The selector right here said, find all of the different records that match this criteria and then just remove them. So update works in much the same fashion. We'll call user.update, and then we'll pass in an object to select all the records with this given criteria that we're going to add on here. So we're going to say find all of the records inside of this user collection with the name of Joe. Now what really distinguishes update from remove is that we actually have to specify, well, what is the update? What are we trying to change here? So as a second argument, we pass in the updated attributes that we want to be applied to all of the found records inside of the user collection. So I'm going to pass in a second argument of an object, and I'm going to say for every record in this collection that has a name of Joe, I want to replace it with the name of Alex. And that's it. So this will find all the records with the name of Joe, replace with Alex. So now we can pass this this kind of operation right here off to our assert name query. We'll say assert name. And because this is a pretty long line, I'm going to just open my parentheses up here, and I'm going to indent this next line. I'll do a comma, and then I'll close it off like so. And then as the second argument, I'm going to pass in my done callback. So do make sure that you remember the done callback up here as well. So we're calling assert name, pass in the operation, comma, pass in the done callback, and then close off the assert name. All right, let's check out our test output. And okay, well that definitely looks bad. I probably saved at a, definitely saved at a bad time. I'm going to start up my test script again. And how are we doing? All right, well, it looks like we've got still a nice big error inside of here. And, totally my fault. So in the two it statements that we added, I'm referencing the done callback, but we're not actually doing anything with it. The instant you reference this done callback, Mocha expects to see it called at some point, and so right now we're not calling it, and so both tests are failing. Let's just continue with the two other it statements, and then we'll just come back at the end and make sure all of our tests are passing. All right, so on to a model class can update one record. So again, this works just like we saw with remove. We are finding a very particular record. The instant we find that record, we'll update it, and then the entire operation stops. So this is really useful when you want to, say, update a single record by passing in a unique attribute. So in the case of users, maybe we've got a unique email for each user. So maybe we want to find a user with a very particular email address and then update one of their attributes. So we'll say user, find one, and update. I want to find a user with a name of Joe. And when we find that user, I want to update their name to be Alex instead. All right. So that's the entire operation right there. We'll find the first user with the name of Joe, set their name to Alex. That's pretty much it. Let's wrap this thing with another assert name. Place our comma at the end of the line over here. Place our done statement, and then close off the assert name. Okay, so I know that I just did a little bit of key work in there, but we're following the same exact pattern as in the test above it, where we call assert name. We pass in the operation, we got a comma, and then the done. All right, just one more, and then we will make sure that all of our tests are passing. So I bet you can guess how this find one and update, or excuse me, find by ID and update is going to work. It's going to look very much like the update that we saw a little bit, or excuse me, like the remove that we saw just a moment ago. So find by ID and remove, it's going to work just the same way with find by ID and update. So we'll say user find by ID and update. And then we need to pass in the ID of the record that we're trying to find. So for us, it'll be joe.id. And then the update we want to do is to update their name to be Alex. And that's it. So we'll call assert name again. Pass in the operation as the first argument, done as the second, oops, and then close off the function call. A good use case for find by ID update, just near exactly the same as with the delete case or the remove case over here. We might have just an ID to a very particular user, which is definitely common in the web world. It's very common when working with servers to just pass around IDs or just a reference to a record inside of our database. So maybe as we pass around an ID at some point in time, we decide, you know what, we need to update their name to something else. And if that's the case, we can go ahead and do so all in one operation with this find by ID and update helper. All right, so now it's time to go and check our tests out. And scroll down to the bottom. Let's start our test suite back up. And fantastic, looks like all of our tests are passing. Okay, so it looks like everything is good to go in the update world. So in this section, we covered the 3 easier methodologies of implementing a model class's update, find one update, and find by ID and update. So in the next section, we're going to start starting to move away from the shore a little bit. We're kind of still a little bit close to the shore. We're going to go into the deep end a little bit more and figure out some of the more complex methods of implementing updates on a collection of records. So let's take a quick break and then start going into the deep end.